You know, usually when we think about a country's foreign policy, we picture it a bit like, well, like being a general contractor.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right, like there's a crisis, a conflict, a literal war zone. The building is burning.
Right.
And historically, for the last several decades, really, Japan has been the ultimate post-conflict contractor.
Yes, yeah, but
They wait for the fire to be put out, the smoke to clear, the treaties to be signed, and then they show up with the hard hats, the blueprints, and the massive checkbook to basically help rebuild the neighborhood.
that's exactly it. They pour the concrete for the new hospitals. They finance the water treatment facilities.
Yeah.
They essentially underwrite the physical resurrection of a shattered state.
Mhm.
And, it is a highly defined, deeply institutionalized role.
Right, it's safe.
Exactly.
Right.
By waiting for the active danger to pass, a state avoids the political landmines of choosing sides or legitimizing armed factions. You
Yeah.
just let the combatants exhaust themselves.
Let them fight it out.
Right. You let the international diplomats force a ceasefire, and then you step in to fund the peace dividend. That approach is really what built Japan's reputation as a benign, purely constructive force in the global south.
But imagine if that same contractor decides they're tired of waiting for the fire to go out.
Oh boy.
Right. Imagine they decide to walk right into the middle of the burning building while the arsonists and the firefighters are still, like, actively wrestling on the floor.
A completely different scenario.
Totally. And they say, all right, everyone stop yelling. Let's sit down and talk this out. That is essentially the massive, fascinating shift in international relations that we are looking at today.
It really is huge.
It just happened literally days ago on April 1st, 2026. Japan is stepping out of that traditional role as a post-war checkbook and stepping into the highly sensitive, incredibly dangerous world of active conflict mediation.
And what's fascinating here is that this is not, it's not some minor bureaucratic update.
Right.
We are not talking about a new desk in a ministry issuing press releases urging restraint. This is a fundamental reimagining of how a major economic power exercises influence on the global stage.
It's a complete pivot.
Exactly. By launching the Center for Mediation Support, or the CMS as we'll call it, through the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Japan is attempting to rewrite its own diplomatic DNA.
Wow.
And they're really trying to challenge the established Western paradigms of how wars are actually stopped.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this major strategic gamble. We're going to look at the mechanics of this sheaf, the team they've assembled, and the incredibly complex battlegrounds they are targeting.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. Now, before we get into the weeds, I want to be super clear with you listening. Analyzing this shift requires us to discuss some highly volatile global conflicts, various armed groups, and intense geopolitical strategies.
Very sensitive stuff.
Very. So our goal today is to impartially report and analyze the concepts driving this new mediation strategy. We aren't taking sides in these regional conflicts.
Right. No endorsements here.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing any political viewpoints, and we aren't passing judgment on the historical grievances involved. We are simply unpacking the mechanics of a massive strategic pivot by a major global player.
And understanding those mechanics is vital because the terrain they're entering is entirely unforgiving.
It's a minefield. Okay, let's unpack this. How does a country famously constrained by a pacifist constitution suddenly decide to insert itself into the middle of active war zones?
There's the million-dollar question.
Right. And why use a private foundation in Minato, Tokyo to do it instead of the formal apparatus of the Japanese government? The timing alone is a massive signal. April 1st, 2026.
Right.
In Japan, April 1st isn't just like a random Tuesday on the calendar.
No, not at all. April 1st is the start of the Japanese fiscal year.
Oh, okay.
So in the world of institutional policy, launching on day one of the fiscal year tells the international community that this is a fully budgeted, heavily resourced, multi-year commitment.
So it's not just testing the waters.
Exactly. It is not an exploratory committee. It is not a temporary pilot program reliant on a single, one-off grant. By syncing the launch of the CMS with the fiscal calendar, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation is planting a permanent flag in the ground.
And that flag represents a total reversal of the official development assistance model, the ODA.
Yes, the famous ODA.
Because Japan dominated the 1980s and 90s as the world's top ODA spender.
They did.
But the new CMS mandate is to get involved before the fighting ends. We are talking about moving upstream in a conflict, to actively help craft peaceful settlements while the conflict is still hot.
And moving upstream is inherently perilous.
I can imagine.
When you focus on post-conflict reconstruction, your agenda is largely unquestioned. I mean, everyone generally agrees that restoring a power grid or vaccinating children is a net positive.
Sure, nobody's arguing against clean water.
Exactly. But the moment you move upstream into active mediation, you are no longer dealing with simple humanitarian logistics. You are suddenly engaging directly with armed insurgencies.
Right, people with guns.
Yeah. You are navigating deeply disputed political claims over sovereignty, land, and identity. You are talking to state governments that are under immense domestic pressure to crush their enemies, not, negotiate with them.
Right, looking weak is not an option for them.
Exactly. You are stepping into the unresolved, violent core of the dispute.
It's like being the friend who always shows up with a casserole after a bad breakup.
Oh, like that.
Suddenly deciding to become a couples counselor right in the middle of a screaming match.
It's a perfect analogy.
It requires a completely different skill set, right?
Yeah.
The casserole friend just needs to be comforting and generous. The counselor needs to know how to de-escalate, how to validate two totally contradictory realities simultaneously, and how not to get hit by a flying plate.
Yeah, that analogy perfectly captures the friction of this transition. And historically, the concept of human security in Japan was carefully designed to avoid the screaming match entirely.
Right, they stayed out of the kitchen.
They really did.
Yeah.
Following World War II, the pacifist constitution, specifically Article 9, renounced war as a sovereign right. Consequently, Japan's primary mechanism for global influence became economic soft power.
The checkbook diplomacy.
Exactly. Their approach to peacebuilding was defined by strict non-interference. It was request-based.
Meaning they waited to be asked?
Yes. They didn't arrive in a developing nation dictating how the political system should be structured. They simply offered the capital and engineering to rebuild it once the local actors stopped shooting each other.
Which I imagine was a massive advantage in places where Western donors were viewed with suspicion.
Oh, absolutely huge.
Because if a Western country offered aid, it usually came with like 50 pages of conditional requirements.
Oh, yeah. Democratic elections, human rights benchmarks,
Yep.
economic restructuring.
Yeah, and Japan would just show up and build the bridge.
Just build the bridge.
But you cannot be an active conflict mediator and maintain a posture of strict non-interference.
No, it's impossible.
Mediation, by definition, is interference. You are actively trying to shape the political outcome of a foreign country.
Yes. Active mediation forces you to take a position, even if that position is just advocating for a specific structure of dialogue. You have to navigate the intense politics of the combatants. You can no longer be a neutral ATM.
Right.
And that operational reality brings us to the actual architecture of the CMS. If you are going to abandon the safe harbor of non-interference and dive into the most complex conflicts in Asia, you need a highly specialized vehicle to do it.
Right, and this is where the scale of the operation feels completely counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, you would assume tackling entrenched multi-generational civil wars requires like an army of diplomats. But the Center for Mediation Support launched with a starting size of roughly 10 specialists.
Yep, 10 people.
10 people. To influence international wars across multiple regions, it sounds almost absurd until you look at the 3 pillars they've built the organization upon.
Right.
Knowledge, network, and practice.
And those 3 pillars explain how a micro-team intends to exert macro-level influence. Looking at the knowledge pillar first, the CMS explicitly positions itself as a hub connecting the expertise of Japanese area studies scholars.
Okay, area studies scholars.
Right. This is a profound departure from the typical Western mediation model, which frequently relies on international relations generalists or international law experts.
Yeah, when I think of a typical UN envoy or a Western diplomat parachuting into a conflict zone, I picture someone armed with a law degree, a clipboard full of human rights frameworks, and like a mandate to force a power-sharing agreement.
Exactly.
They are experts in the mechanics of treaties, but maybe not the actual place they're standing in.
That is exactly the contrast the CMS is drawing. Japanese area studies scholars have a long, meticulous tradition of deeply immersing themselves in the granular realities of a region.
Granular how?
Well, they spend decades studying the linguistics, the historical grievances, the religious syncretism, and the microsociology of specific conflict zones.
So they actually speak the local dialects.
Yes, and they understand the culture implicitly. The CMS is signaling that successful mediation doesn't start with a legal framework. It starts with a multidimensional understanding of why two specific villages have been caught in a cycle of reprisal killings since the 19th century. You need the anthropologist, not just the lawyer.
Wow, okay. Which feeds directly into the network pillar, right?
Exactly.
A team of 10 doesn't need to be everywhere if they are the central node in a massive web. They are sharing this hyper-specific, localized knowledge globally and participating in international forums.
Right?
They are taking the vast accumulated field experience of the entire Nippon Foundation group and channeling it through these 10 specialists to international organizations and other state actors.
And then we reach the practice pillar. This is the actual boots-on-the-ground execution.
The actual doing of the thing.
Right. Facilitating dialogue, providing capacity-building training for conflict actors, and designing tailored mediation environments. But there is a very deliberate, legally precise phrase the CMS uses to define their operational boundaries.
What's the phrase?
They state they're exploring pathways to resolve conflicts, quote, without reliance on force.
Without reliance on force. I mean, on the surface, that sounds like standard peace-building boilerplate.
It does.
Obviously, a peace foundation isn't relying on force. They don't have an army. But knowing the context of Japan's constitution, that phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Oh, it's doing massive heavy lifting. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a masterclass in dual-purpose messaging.
How so?
Well, for the domestic Japanese audience, it perfectly aligns the CMS with the post-1945 pacifist constitutional tradition. It provides absolute political cover, reassuring the public and lawmakers that this initiative will not drag Japan into foreign military entanglement.
Right, don't worry, we're not sending our troops over there.
Exactly. But for the international audience, the armed groups and foreign governments they are engaging, it sets a hard boundary. It manages expectations immediately.
Ah, I see. It tells a rebel group or a beleaguered state government, do not ask us for security assistance.
Yes.
We are not going to provide weapons. We are not going to send peacekeeping troops to guard a demilitarized zone. And we are not going to offer military training.
No.
We are bringing dialogue, capacity building, and structural analysis. That is the menu. Take it or leave it.
Precisely. It filters out combatants who are only looking for a tactical patron and selects for actors who actually need a conduit for negotiation.
That makes a lot of sense.
But your earlier point remains, how does a 10-person team facilitate that dialogue?
Yeah, the logistics of that still baffle me a bit.
Well, the answer lies in the specific personnel structure, particularly the inclusion of an advisor role alongside the operational staff.
Ah. Yuji Mori is listed as the advisor.
Yes.
And in an organization this small, giving someone an explicit advisor title rather than a direct operational portfolio, that's a major tell.
It really is. It reveals that the CMS is scaling its impact through institutional memory and deeply entrenched back-channel relationships, rather than sheer manpower.
It's about who you know.
Exactly. In the opaque world of high-level mediation, a single individual who possesses the direct, private phone numbers of a rebel general, a regional warlord, and a state intelligence director is worth more than a battalion of mid-level diplomats.
It's the special operations approach to diplomacy.
That's a great way to put it.
You don't need a massive footprint if your tiny footprint is standing in the exact right room at the exact right time.
Exactly.
But a specialized unit like that requires incredibly precise leadership. You need a director who has actually lived in the trenches of these intractable conflicts. And the Sasakawa Peace Foundation selected Horiba Akiko to lead the CMS.
And Horiba's appointment is arguably the loudest operational signal the Foundation could have sent regarding their intended methodology.
Why is that?
Because her background is not in a sterile ministry office in Tokyo. She is a Southeast Asia specialist who has spent her career, particularly since 2010, deeply embedded in the conflict in southern Thailand.
Okay, so for those listening who might not track Southeast Asian insurgencies daily, the conflict in Thailand's deep south is one of the most brutal, grinding, and complex situations on the planet.
It really is.
You have the Thai government fighting against Malay Islamic separatist groups. It involved intense cultural, religious, and linguistic divides. It is an environment where trust is virtually non-existent.
Zero trust.
And Horiba hasn't just been writing academic papers about it from afar. She has been actively on the ground, facilitating dialogue and building relationships in a space where simply talking to the wrong person can get you killed.
She has spent over a decade navigating a conflict that routinely defies traditional diplomatic solutions. And her intellectual inspirations are equally telling here.
Who does she look to?
She frequently cites the Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet, the group that won the 2015 Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, the Tunisian Quartet. That's a fascinating model because it wasn't a group of foreign diplomats or UN officials.
Hmm.
It was a domestic civil society coalition. It was the labor union, the employers union, the Human Rights League, and the Lawyers' Order. They stepped into the political vacuum after the Arab Spring when the country was on the brink of civil war and brokered a democratic transition.
Right. And by looking to the quartet as her North Star, Horiba is signaling a core belief. Profound, durable peace is often brokered by non-state actors deeply embedded in the social fabric, not by external state powers imposing a solution.
It has to come from within.
Exactly. She spent years in Thailand asking herself what Japan could do to serve as an intermediary that empowers that kind of local civil society-led dialogue. The CMS is the institutional manifestation of that vision, and she intends to execute it using what she explicitly calls a quintessentially Asian approach to the craft of mediation.
A quintessentially Asian approach. She's drawing a very sharp contrast here. She is explicitly rejecting the reliance on established Western models.
Very explicit.
So we need to define what she is pushing off against. When we talk about the Western approach to conflict mediation, what are the actual mechanics of that model?
Well, the dominant Western frameworks, typified by institutions like the Harvard Negotiation Project, various European foreign ministries, or even standard UN operations, they are heavily rooted in legalism.
Legalism, meaning contracts.
Yes, they focus intensely on rights-based discourse, formal power-sharing agreements, external verification mechanisms, and aggressive timelines.
So getting it done fast and in writing.
Right. The underlying assumption is often that if you can engineer the correct legal mechanics, document them in a binding treaty, and hold a signing ceremony in Geneva or Oslo, the conflict is resolved. It treats war as a structural legal dispute.
It's the engineering mindset applied to human violence. Find the broken gear, draft a contract to replace it, sign on the dotted line, and the machine should work again.
That's the theory.
But Horiba's critique is that in deeply entrenched identity-based conflicts, that legalistic approach fails miserably.
And she's right. The failure rate of those quick treaties is staggering. The Asian approach the CMS is advocating fundamentally reorders the priorities.
How so?
Based on their stated methodology, it involves long-term accompaniment. It demands deep local contextual knowledge. Most importantly, it views religious and cultural frameworks not as irrational obstacles to a secular peace, but as legitimate, vital resources for reconciliation.
Interesting.
The primary objective is building genuine trust over time, rather than forcing a premature, formal power-sharing agreement that looks good on paper but lacks buy-in from the combatants.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back on this philosophy.
Okay, go for it.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of a local community in a conflict zone, all right? Your village is getting shelled. Your economy is destroyed. If you are the victim of active violence, do you really want an Asian approach consisting of a 10-year trust-building exercise where mediators drink tea with warlords and discuss cultural frameworks?
I see where you're going.
Right. Or do you want a Western-style binding legal treaty signed tomorrow morning that legally mandates the bombs stop dropping? Isn't this Asian approach just a polite academic rebranding of extreme patience?
That tension you're describing is the central paradox of peace building. The immediate cessation of violence is always the desperate, urgent demand of the victims, absolutely.
Right.
But the empirical data from the last 50 years of conflict resolution shows us that prioritizing a quick signature over deep structural resolution almost always results in a return to violence.
Really?
Yes. A treaty signed under immense international pressure by political leaders who utterly despise each other and who haven't addressed the underlying structural grievances of their populations is nothing but a temporary ceasefire waiting to shatter.
So you're saying the quick fix actually prolongs the war in the long run because it creates a false peace that inevitably collapses, often with worse violence than before?
Yes, exactly. The CMS is arguing that you cannot bypass the incredibly messy, frustratingly slow work of building relationships and altering the fundamental perceptions of the combatants.
It takes time.
It takes a lot of time. If the conflicting parties do not ultimately recognize each other's humanity, their shared history, and their mutual right to exist, no legally binding piece of paper will stop the violence. The Asian approach attempts to formalize this slow, deeply rooted relational work into a recognized, robust technology for conflict transformation, proving it is more durable than Western legalism.
Testing a philosophy like that requires a laboratory, and Horiba certainly didn't pick an easy one. To really understand what the CMS is up against, we have to look at the conflict backlog in Asia.
It's a daunting list.
It is. The geographic scope they are targeting covers Southeast, South, and West Asia. This is an arc of the globe containing some of the densest, most historically complicated conflicts on Earth.
And their primary operational reference point, as we discussed, is Thailand's Deep South. This is where the CMS methodology is really being stress tested.
Let's look at the data from the Deep South for a second. Between 2004 and the end of 2015, the violence resulted in over 6,500 deaths and nearly 12,000 injuries.
Horrific numbers.
And the casualty list is indiscriminately brutal. Civilians, state troops, police officers, suspected insurgents, even local teachers and Buddhist monks.
Yeah.
But the core challenge for a mediator here isn't just the violence itself, it is the structure of the insurgency. The main opposition group is the Barisan Revolution National, the BRN, and the BRN is severely fragmented.
And fragmentation is the nightmare scenario for any mediator.
Why is that?
Well, the BRN is not a monolithic organization with a clear chain of command. There's a profound, often paralyzing disconnect between their political wing and their military wing.
So they aren't on the same page.
Not at all. You have factions within the insurgency demanding absolute sovereignty and the creation of a completely independent, liberated state. Simultaneously, you have other factions who are quietly willing to discuss alternative political configurations, such as remaining within Thailand, but as a special administrative zone with high levels of autonomy.
Okay, so put yourself in the position of a traditional diplomat. You spend months back-channeling to finally get the Thai government representatives and the BRN political leaders into the same room. You start hammering out an autonomy agreement.
Right.
But the BRN leader sitting across from you cannot actually guarantee that the military commanders hiding in the jungle won't simply ignore the agreement and ambush a military patrol the next day because they view autonomy as a betrayal of their demand for full independence.
Exactly.
How do you negotiate with an entity that cannot control its own components?
A traditional state-based diplomat often can't. They are structurally limited to talking to the formal political representatives.
They can only talk to the guys in suits.
Precisely. And this is exactly where a multi-track organization like the Sasakawa Peace Foundation becomes indispensable. Operating as a private foundation, SBF doesn't just focus on the high-level political leadership. They spend years operating at the grassroots level.
The area studies approach.
Right. They train civil society actors, they facilitate localized community consultations, and they build mechanisms to capture the actual aspirations of the local population and the field-level fighters.
They are running track 1 diplomacy, the high-level political stuff, and track 2 diplomacy, the civil society, grassroots stuff simultaneously.
Exactly. They attempt to stitch the fragmented insurgency back together from the bottom up.
Wow.
By surfacing the voices of the community and funneling them up to the negotiating table, they help bridge the gap between the rigid political demands of the leadership and the nuanced realities of the people actually living in the conflict zone.
And we see them applying this exact same multi-track methodology in the Philippines, specifically in the Bangsamoro region.
Yes. The Bangsamoro case is a perfect illustration of why the CMS believes the work doesn't stop when the treaty is signed. In 2018, the Bangsamoro Organic Law was passed, officially establishing an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao.
Okay.
Under the Western legalistic model, that is the finish line. The law is passed, the autonomy is granted, the conflict is theoretically over.
But the reality on the ground is completely different, isn't it?
Very different.
Because the high-level political agreement doesn't instantly erase decades of intercommunal violence, clan feuds, and local resource disputes.
Nope.
In March 2026, just weeks before the CMS officially launched, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation published an extensive baseline study on community mediation practices in the Bangsamoro region.
Which demonstrates their commitment to the accompaniment phase.
Mm-hmm.
The political architecture was settled in 2018, but the granular, village-level reconciliation is an ongoing struggle in 2026.
It's maintenance.
Yes, exactly. The CMS recognizes that if local disputes over land or local power aren't mediated effectively, they can spiral upward and eventually fracture the macro-level peace agreement. They are providing the ongoing maintenance required to keep the peace from collapsing.
And their ambition extends far beyond Southeast Asia. They are actively targeting the Rohingya crisis, which spans Myanmar and Bangladesh.
A massively complex issue.
You were talking about state-sponsored violence, massive refugee flows, allegations of genocide, and complete diplomatic gridlock involving multiple regional powers. It is the definition of an intractable crisis.
It really is.
But even that isn't the limit. Horiba has explicitly stated that the CMS eventually intends to operate in West Asia.
And moving into West Asia, what is broadly termed the Middle East, is the ultimate crucible for the CMS. It raises a massive operational question. In Southeast Asia, Japan possesses tremendous historical, economic, and cultural leverage. They're a deeply integrated entity. The Middle East, however, is an entirely different ecosystem. It is hyper-scrutinized, saturated with proxy wars, and heavily manipulated by major superpower rivalries.
Right. It's one thing to mediate a localized autonomy dispute in the Philippines. It is quite another to step into the crosshairs of conflicts involving Iran, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and various heavily armed non-state actors.
If the CMS can successfully transplant their Asian approach, the long-term accompaniment, the reliance on cultural frameworks, the multi-track dialogue into the Middle East, and achieve tangible results, they will have proven that their methodology is not just a regional quirk.
It becomes a universal template.
Yes, a universally applicable technology for conflict resolution.
Which fundamentally changes the way you, listening to this, should view global news. When you read a headline about a peace summit failing, it's not always because the parties want war. It's often because the mechanism they're using, two guys in suits arguing over a legal document, is fundamentally flawed for that specific conflict. The CMS is trying to build a better mechanism.
They are.
But operating that mechanism, especially in places like Myanmar or the Middle East, requires an incredible amount of political cover. Which brings us to the most bizarre, fascinating structural reality of this entire endeavor. The CMS, this elite team tackling the world's worst conflicts, is completely independent of the Japanese government.
And that structural independence is not a bug, it is the defining feature of their strategy. To grasp how this works, we have to look at the dual track of Japan's new peace mediation landscape.
Right, because right around the exact same time the CMS was gearing up, in March 2026, the actual Japanese government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or MOFA, launched its own International Peace Mediation Unit.
They did?
The government pulled 25 officials from various bureaus to essentially do the same thing: prevent conflicts, facilitate dialogue, and end combats abroad.
So, within a span of mere weeks, Tokyo births two distinct, highly resourced international mediation centers. One public, one private.
It sounds like a duplication of effort.
It does. But the revelation came during the CMS launch press conference. The president of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation stated on the record that there had been absolutely no prior discussion or coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs regarding their respective launches.
Zero coordination.
Zero. You have the sovereign government and a massive private foundation, both operating out of the same city, both launching major foreign policy initiatives targeting the exact same global conflicts, and they didn't even exchange a memo.
Apparently not.
To a casual observer, that looks like catastrophic institutional fragmentation. But digging deeper, it looks like a highly deliberate, utterly brilliant division of labor.
It is the strategic advantage of plausible deniability mixed with operational flexibility. Consider the severe constraints placed on official government diplomacy.
Okay, lay it out. The 25 civil servants in the MOFA unit represent the sovereign state of Japan. If a Japanese government official sits down in a room with a designated terrorist group or an unrecognized rebel militia, the Japanese state is implicitly lending international legitimacy to that group.
Oh, right.
They risk infuriating the host government of the conflict zone, and they risk triggering diplomatic crises with their own allies, particularly the United States, who might have sanctioned those groups. MOFA is paralyzed by the rigid protocols of statecraft.
I picture MOFA as the formal diplomatic dining room. Everyone has to wear a tailored suit, mind their manners perfectly, stick strictly to the pre-approved menu, and you can only invite officially recognized state-sanctioned guests.
Right.
If you invite the wrong person, the whole dinner party is ruined.
A perfect visualization.
Yeah.
The CMS, however, operating as a private entity backed by the massive endowment of the Nippon Foundation, is completely liberated from those constraints.
So the CMS is the kitchen table at 2 a.m. You can invite the rebel commander, the exiled politician, the local warlord. You can yell. You can brainstorm insane compromises off the record. You can build actual human rapport. And the Japanese government can stand at the podium the next day and honestly tell the international community, we have no idea what they are doing. They are a private foundation. We don't control them.
Sasakawa Yohei, the honorary chair of the foundation, articulated this exact philosophy. He explicitly stated that the value of the CMS is its ability to, quote, speak freely without governmental restrictions.
Speak freely?
Yes. A private foundation can directly engage armed non-state actors, convene highly sensitive informal dialogues, and explore controversial political compromises without ever implicating Japan's official foreign policy.
And Sasakawa Yohei himself is the ultimate practitioner of this dual-track strategy. Look at his involvement in the Myanmar peace process. He has operated simultaneously as the special envoy of the government of Japan and the chairperson of the Nippon Foundation. He is literally playing both sides of the street.
It is a masterful execution of hybrid diplomacy. In one meeting, he can use his official government title to leverage the promise of Japan's massive economic aid and infrastructure investment.
The carrot.
Exactly. In the next meeting, he can strip off the government title, put on his private foundation hat, and quietly negotiate with ethnic armed organizations in the jungle that the central government refuses to formally acknowledge. The official state effort runs parallel to the highly agile private effort.
It reminds me of the Norway model.
Oh, yes.
You have the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs working right alongside independent research institutes like FOFO, or the way the HD Center operates out of Geneva. You have the prestige of the state backing the flexibility of the private actor.
The proven model.
But getting an invitation to either the formal dining room or the 2 a.m. kitchen table requires one non-negotiable currency: trust. Neither a paranoid state government nor a heavily armed rebel group is going to sit down with you if they suspect you are secretly maneuvering for your own geopolitical advantage. Which brings us to the core claim underpinning Japan's entire strategy: the concept of neutrality.
And Horiba stated unequivocally that Japan enjoys a neutral position that can be mutually recognized by both parties to a conflict.
That's a bold claim.
It is. This assertion of neutrality is the foundational pillar holding up the entire CMS methodology. If they aren't perceived as neutral, the entire Asian approach collapses.
Let's aggressively audit that claim, starting with the evidence supporting it. Why would a Southeast Asian or Middle Eastern actor view Japan as neutral?
Well, first, the data backs it up.
Okay.
Surveys from organizations like Aid Data consistently show that Japan is the most trusted extra-regional nation in Southeast Asia. They have spent decades cultivating a reputation for actually listening to local needs, rather than dictating terms.
The ODA legacy paying off.
Yes. Furthermore, they are viewed as a cultural superpower, exporting technology, art, and soft power, rather than ideology.
Crucially, they lack the specific historical baggage that hampers other potential mediators. Unlike the UK or France, Japan does not carry the legacy of 19th and 20th century European colonialism in the Middle East or South Asia.
Right.
Unlike China, Japan is not deeply entangled in local proxy politics, debt trap diplomacy allegations, or immediate border disputes with these nations. And unlike the United States or Russia, Japan is not a major arms supplier fueling the very conflicts they are trying to mediate.
They show up with engineers, not arms dealers.
Exactly. That provides a massive baseline of goodwill. And this is a big but, Japan is absolutely not a blank slate.
No, of course not.
Let's look at the immense challenges to this neutrality claim. First, you have the deeply scarred history of World War II. The Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia from 1941 to 1945 remains a highly sensitive, unresolved historical trauma in several nations.
That's a major hurdle in certain regions.
But more pressingly, look at their current geopolitical posture. Japan is inextricably legally allied with the United States. And right now, in response to regional threats, Japan is massively expanding its defense budget, altering its constitutional interpretations regarding self-defense, and rapidly expanding its security footprint.
This is the central paradox the CMS must navigate. Neutrality is not an objective, permanent state of being. It is entirely a subjective perception held by the combatant.
Right.
And maintaining that perception while your national defense posture is aggressively shifting is a monumental task.
Let's be brutally realistic here. If I am the leader of an armed insurgency and I watch the Japanese government acting in absolute lockstep with U.S. global security interests, participating in joint military exercises, and buying hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles...
Yeah, the Tomahawks.
Right. How long can a Japanese mediator realistically play the "we are just a pacifist, non-aligned friend who wants to listen" card? At some point, the hard power reality of the Japanese state has to bleed into the soft power perception of the Japanese mediator. You can't separate the two forever.
That is precisely the tightrope they are walking. Japan is operating in an increasingly volatile, contested security environment, particularly regarding tensions in Northeast Asia and the South China Sea.
They have to defend themselves.
Of course. The state feels compelled to ramp up its hard power deterrence. In many ways, the heavy investment in the CMS can be viewed as a deliberate soft power
Oh,
counterbalance.
that's interesting.
It is a strategic attempt to artificially preserve Japan's identity as a benign peacemaker, even as the state apparatus becomes more militarized. Horiba is highly calculated with her phrasing. She doesn't claim Japan is objectively neutral. She says its neutrality can be recognized by both parties.
Can be recognized.
Yes, she acknowledges that neutrality must be actively negotiated, proven, and accepted in every single distinct context. It is a verb, not a noun.
Successfully navigating that paradox, convincing the world you are a neutral peacemaker while your homeland arms itself, will ultimately determine if the CMS survives its first decade. Which leads us to look at the long game. What are the metrics of success here, and what are the existential risks to this operation?
Well, the structural risks are immediate and severe. As we discussed, a 10-person team covering massive, volatile regions like Southeast and West Asia is incredibly thin staffing.
Very thin.
There is a profound reliance on Horiba's personal network and the idiosyncratic relationships of the senior advisors. If she or a few key staff members decide to leave, does the institutional memory and trust vanish with them?
That's a huge single point of failure.
It is. Furthermore, while the lack of coordination with MOFA provides agility, it also creates the immense risk of crossed wires.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
If the official Japanese diplomatic corps and the private CMS operatives accidentally contradict each other during a fragile, high-stakes peace process, it could completely destroy Japan's credibility.
Yikes. But looking at their public statements, they are clearly thinking decades past these immediate operational risks. At the launch event, Sasakawa Yohei made a specific promise to dispatch young Japanese researchers around the world, embedding them in various regions to build a human capital base for peace mediation.
This reveals the true generational ambition of the CMS. They're not merely trying to secure a quick win in Thailand next year to justify their budget.
Right.
They're engaging in 30-year institutional capacity building. They are attempting to cultivate an entire ecosystem of Japanese mediators, scholars, and Track 2 diplomats who possess lifelong, deeply rooted relationships in these volatile regions.
So it's not just a quick fix.
Not at all. That is exactly how Norway built its disproportionate influence in global peacemaking. It requires decades of patient investment in human capital.
It's the ultimate long game. You are planting trees today so that a diplomatic corps that hasn't even been born yet can sit in the shade.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
But to truly cement this legacy and prove that the Asian approach is viable, they have to do something they haven't done yet. They have to publish the methodology.
Absolutely. If the CMS genuinely believes that their model long-term accompaniment, multi-track engagement, leveraging cultural frameworks is superior to Western legalism, they cannot practice it exclusively in the shadows.
Right, they have to show their work.
They must eventually articulate it. They have to write the definitive policy papers, publish the practitioner guides, and open their methodology up to the harsh scrutiny of the broader academic and diplomatic communities. They need to provide empirical evidence that their relational approach creates more durable peace than the standard legal frameworks.
You know, it is easy to look at a small foundation office opening up in Tokyo and think it is just an administrative footnote.
Sure.
But if you are listening to this and wondering why it matters to you, it's because the fundamental mechanics of how the world stops wars might be shifting right in front of us. We could be watching the slow transition away from Western, legalistic, state-driven treaties toward localized, private sector, culturally embedded dialogue. If the CMS succeeds, the very definition of how humanity achieves and sustains peace is going to change.
It is a remarkable historical pivot. We are witnessing Japan attempt to transcend its post-war identity as a mere aid donor, transforming into a proactive, risk-taking private sector peacemaker, attempting to completely rewrite the global playbook of conflict mediation.
It has been an incredible journey unpacking this today. We started by looking at Japan as the cleanup crew, the contractor who safely shows up after the fire is out. And now we see them deliberately walking into the burning building, trying to talk the combatants down, armed with nothing but deep local knowledge, a network of scholars, and incredible patience.
And as we watch them navigate the smoke of those active conflicts, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider.
All right, what is it?
As global conflicts become increasingly fragmented and official state diplomacy becomes continuously paralyzed by superpower rivalries, we have to ask ourselves, are we entering a new era where private organizations, foundations, and NGOs actually wield more tangible peacemaking power than sovereign governments.
Wow.
And if these private, fundamentally unaccountable groups are the ones designing the architecture of global peace, who holds them accountable if their designs fail?
That is a brilliant and heavy question to chew on as we watch this play out over the next few years. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is always so valuable to look past the daily headlines and understand the hidden gears that are actually driving global diplomacy. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative.